Parak HaMakabel Soda Mechavero Daf Kuf Vav, sponsored the Refuah Shlema for Aaron Ben Rocha. We begin with the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the law of a tenant farmer who leased a grain field devoured by locusts or ruined by strong winds. If it is a Makas Medina, widespread damage, the tenant farmer can deduct his rent payment according to the amount of damage suffered by the field. If the damage was limited to his field, the owner can claim it was his bad mazel. Rabbi Yehuda holds that this law applies only where the tenant farmer contracted to pay produce. However, if he contracted to pay money, he is liable even if the damage was widespread. The decree was directed at produce, not its value. La halacha, there is no difference between paying money or produce. The Gemara begins with the definition of a Makas Medina. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda holds all the fields in that valley must be affected. 2. Ula holds it suffices that the 4 fields surrounding the one leased were affected. The Gemara questions the definition of Makas Medina applying just to a local area. In the years Yomi was in effect, ancestral land sold could be redeemed before reverting automatically to their original owners at Yovel if 2 productive years passed in the possession of the buyer. A brisa teaches a productive year is one even when all the fields in a valley were devastated, as long as it did not affect a whole Medina. Apparently, the definition of a Makas Medina is literal. It must include the whole province. The Gemara resolves this by differentiating scripturally. Concerning the 2-year redemption period, the Torah states, Mispar Shnei Tuos Yimkar Lach. The factor is crop years. However, the tenant farmer's claim is the field he leased was unsuitable. This is substantiated by the destruction of the surrounding fields. Shvius, a sabbatical year, is not counted as one of the 2 productive years. There is a produce growing outside Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara answers that Shvius is Afkat the Malka, a suspension of a king for any agricultural activity in Eretz Yisrael. Agriculture elsewhere cannot influence this powerful decree. However, if the owner redeems his ancestral land from Hegdish, the Shemitah year is deducted when calculating the redemption cost according to the remaining years before Yovel. This is because during Shemitah the land can be used for other purposes such as drying fruit. The Gemara presents variations of Ula's case that remain unresolved. Number 1, the border row of each surrounding field was destroyed, or 1 bordering row of each surrounding field remained. Number 2, the 4 surrounding fields were fallow, but those beyond the 4 were destroyed. 3, aspas, the animal feed, was grown in the 4 surrounding fields that were not destroyed. Number 4, a different type of crop, such as legumes, was grown successfully in the 4 surrounding fields, or even barley instead of wheat. Number 5, the destruction was as drought instead of intense winds. The tenant farmer deviated from the contract, planting barley instead of wheat. In the rest of the valley, both grains were destroyed. The Gemara states the owner can claim, had the farmer planted wheat as instructed, Hashem would have answered his prayers specifically. All the owner's fields, including the one leased, were destroyed, but not the surrounding fields. The owner still can claim it was not due to a decree against him. If not for the decree against the tenant, Hashem would have left him the leased field to survive. All the tenant's fields, including the leased one and most of the valley, was destroyed. The owner can claim it was a decree against the farmer because all his fields were destroyed. The farmer cannot counter a small amount would have remained for his survival, as in the previous case, because the leased field is not his. Shmuel qualifies the tenant farmer's right to deduct his rent for a Makas Medina. Farmer's right is only if he planted a field that was later destroyed. The owner can claim, based on a verse in Tehillim, had the farmer planted his field, it would have produced miraculously in spite of the general plague. A brisa contradicts this. It teaches a shepherd whose flock was attacked by wild animals in his absence is responsible only if he could have saved them. The owner cannot claim, had he been present, he would have saved them miraculously. The Gemara applies a well-known machlokus between Rebbe and Rav Shimon Gamliel to our Mishnah. One brisa states the farmer must attempt 3 plantings before deducting his rent. Another brisa states 2. According to Rebbe, a chazak, a presumption established based on an event happening twice. According to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, an event happening 3 times. Fundamental machlokus concerns how many times a woman widows to be considered a katlonis. Reish Lakish qualifies the previous ruling. The presumption of a general plague can be determined by 2 or 3 plantings only if something grew otherwise. The owner can claim the farmer planted prematurely. This is true for early planted crops such as wheat and rye until the end of Kislev. If late planting crops such as beans and barley, then it is until the end of Adar. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses the obligation of the tenant farmer in a case where a wind diminish the quality of the crops, not destroy them. He pays his rent from the diminished crops. The Gemara qualifies this. If he leased the field to grow asfasta and pay his rent with barley, he cannot pay with a diminished barley crop grown in the leased field. This case is different than the Mishnah because he deviated from his agreement to plant asfasta. Farmer leased a vineyard for 10 barrels of wine that's sour. He must purchase new wine in the market to pay for his rent. This case also differs from our Mishnah. The vineyard produced quality grapes, the wine spoiled in the barrels. However, if grapes became infested before pressing or grain spoiled in the field, the owner must accept them as payment. If you're enjoying Daf 5, please subscribe.